Could you tell us your name and what you do for a living?
Yes, of course. My name is Matthew Cohen, and I teach at Royal Holloway, University of London, in the Department of Drama and Theatre.
When did you hear gamelan for the first time?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think it was probably when I was in college or university in the United States. I went to school at Harvard University, which didn't have a gamelan, but had ethnomusicology in the music department. And one of the professors there, a Chinese professor named Rulin Pian, encouraged me to study gamelan, actually. And the story is interesting, that I was at university at a time when there was a lot of interest in Asia, in Asian performing arts in the 1980s. This is the time of Butoh dance was very popular, where Philip Glass was writing operas which were influenced by Asia, where there were a lot of directors like Peter Brook who were creating Asia-based work. His Mahabharata went up when I was in university. And I was very interested in the kind of the root sources of these theater interculturalism. We didn't have a name for it in the 1980s, but this was eventually what was talked about as interculturalism. And I knew that there was some relationship between what I was seeing on stages in Cambridge, Mass. And in New York with what was happening in Asia, and I was very interested in finding out more as somebody who was a student of the theatrical avant-garde. And so I took a class in ethnomusicology in Chinese music, and I spoke with my professor saying that I'll never be able to go to China or Japan. These languages were far too difficult for me. I wouldn't be able to get the grants to go there. Everyone was busy studying Chinese and Japanese, all my roommates, my friends. And so she encouraged me to learn about gamelan and to go to Indonesia, which was very generous of her, as she was a Chinese ethnomusicologist. And as it happened, she pointed me in the direction of the Boston Village Gamelan, which was a gamelan started up, I think, in the 1970s. And had been based in a number of universities. At the time, it was outside in the community. The gamelan was in a local church, and I went and I played along while I was doing this class in China's ethnomusicology. And that was really my first exposure to gamelan. In fact, was actually playing gamelan, not listening. I listened to a few recordings in the Harvard Library. There wasn't much. And I found it, interesting. I fantasized about what kind of theater would go along with this gamelan, and stumbled across Wayang Kulit. And it was this desire to learn more about Asia, and also this interest in a theater form where it was essentially a one-man show, where the dalang, or shadow puppeteer, tells the stories, he conducts the music, he sings songs, he does all the puppet movement, he officiates over ritual aspects, and this was fascinating for me, the kind of degree of control that one performer could have. And I was interested in these auteur directors of the avant-garde, who also saw themselves as master creators. And so I applied for a Fulbright grant to go off to Indonesia during my senior year of college. I applied for a Fulbright grant, and I got it. So I spent a year. I received a year's funding, which I stretched into 2, to study at the conservatoire. It was then known as Akademi Seni Karawitan Indonesia Surakarta, or the Indonesian Performing Arts Academy of Surakarta, and later went through several status elevations and became a university. It's now known as Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta, or the Institute of Indonesian Arts in Surakarta. And I went there initially really not knowing what I would do exactly. I didn't have a real methodology. I had studied psychology as an undergraduate at college, and had some vague ideas that I would do something around cultural psychology. But because my host was a conservatoire, the first day I showed up, they arranged, said, "Who's going to be my teacher?" was going to teach me how to do wayang, and that was something quite surprising to me, that I would be paired up with a teacher and actually learn how to be a dalang. And I spent 2 years in the conservatoire and did a lot of study outside as well, and started to perform when I was living in Solo. So that was between 1988 and 1990. 1990, by that time I had really decided that this was it. This was something I really wanted to pursue. And my original goals of kind of doing, creating my own theater based on wayang, or just finding out more generally about this root source in order to understand the avant-garde, receded a bit, and I became more and more interested in studying about wayang from an academic point of view, and also pursuing the practice as well. And finding a way to do this, I decided that I would go to graduate school in anthropology. I got a very generous offer from Yale University, not only to study anthropology there, but also to have private tuition in Javanese, which I realized after after a few months would be essential, actually, to anyone who's really interested in wayang. So a very good knowledge of Javanese. And I pursued the studies of, I got accepted to Yale in anthropology. I was very interested in studying the fieldwork methods and techniques also, which come along with anthropology. And at Yale I had this wonderful teacher of Javanese, Tina Polsky, who was the musicologist named Philip Yampolsky, and was a lecturer at Yale, teaching mostly Indonesian, so I was her first student in Javanese language. Private one-on-one tuition. We read Javanese literature and dramatic scripts, which was wonderful, for 2 years, very intensely. I also audited classes at the Yale School of Drama, and then went back for field work in 1993. Now, as it happened, I had originally planned to go back to Surakarta, this royal court city where I had studied in the conservatoire. But my first grant application for funding wasn't successful, and I became very despondent. And I said, "Oh, I shouldn't go to Surakarta. I should choose another area of Java, which hadn't been studied extensively." And when I was living in Java between 88 and 90, I had spent a little bit of time in Cirebon in the north coast, and which was fascinating, an area where there's very, very little research has been done, with a very lively wayang tradition. And so I worked up a number of grant proposals. I said, "Oh, well, I didn't get my first one. I'll apply to everything I can." So 1992, and I got everything. I got more than I could possibly spend. I got all these grants, and it was wonderful. I came to Cirebon with a lot of money. I was able to stretch, again, what would in ordinary circumstances be, normal kind of PhD fieldwork would be 1 year. I was able to do 2.5 years of field work, and also immerse myself in this oral tradition of the wayang, because as I learned quickly in Cirebon, that it didn't have the kind of schools and regimented education of the Surakarta area, which I had lived in before, but was very much an oral tradition. And so, learning about it, I became an apprentice puppeteer. And while initially my design was to kind of I was doing a lot of transcripts of audio cassettes and learning about wayang that way. And eventually I was prompted to abandon these texts and to work in the oral improvisatory style. And so by the late 1990s, after a couple of years of field work and some postdoctoral work as well at the International Institute for Asian Studies in Leiden, I was probably the first foreign puppeteer who was improvising stories in Javanese, that is not working from established text or imitating other people's stories, but actually creating my own stories and for rural audiences in Java, as the custom in Cirebon. And that was pretty extraordinary, actually, as well as doing ritual dramas and excising demons and blessing fishing boats and ensuring the prosperity of communities and rice harvests and such. So I became very, very deeply involved in the culture of Cirebon, to the point, so it's ignoring every other part of Indonesia. And so, it was at the end of my postdoc that at the end of 2000, I received a job offer at the University of Glasgow in the UK. We'd already been in Europe. It didn't seem so strange to stay on in Europe. And I went off to Glasgow, and arriving there in December 2000. When I was there, I quickly found out about the Scottish Mask and Puppet Centre, which was located on the doorstep of Glasgow University. And the director of that centre, a man named Malcolm Knight, had already planned to invite a very famous dalang, Asap Sunandar Sunaria, to spend a week giving a master class at the Scottish Mask and Puppet Centre, which I attended, and so I had a wonderful chance of studying with Pa Asap there. I'd also found out about a gamelan group called Gamelan Nagamas, which was based in Glasgow, and had been set up kind of as an educational arm of one of the Scottish orchestras in collaboration with the social services. And when I arrived in Glasgow in 2000, 2001, it was more or less defunct. There were a couple of players left who occasionally would get together, but essentially the gamelan was defunct. It was inactive. And at this workshop of Asap Sunandar Sunari, I met one of the ex-members of Gamelan Nagamas. We both decided that out of this workshop that we could work together to revitalize Nagamas. And I put together a grant proposal in 2001 to invite a puppeteer in residence, one of my former teachers from Surakarta, a man named Joko Susilo, who had just finished a PhD in New Zealand. And I brought in the Scottish Mask and Puppet Centre as a partner in this as well, so that Mas Joko would be able to spend half his time at the university as artist in residence, funded by a Leverhulme Trust grant, and half the time at the Scottish Mask and Puppet Centre. And this was, we got the grant, and it was an enormous success that quickly old members returned, new members came in, the group became very active and revitalized. Mas Joko was doing a lot of private tuition, trained up a very good drummer. New music began to be written for the gamelan up there, and the gamelan scene in Glasgow, which had done occasional concerts over the decade or so up to 2001, so all of a sudden took on a very new and exciting direction, and through this revitalized Gamelan Nagamas. So very exciting. And I spent the next 3 years, I was taken on as the head of Gamelan Nagamas, the convener of it. We brought in many guest artists during my time there from Indonesia. We did collaborations with Scottish artists and artists from other countries as well. And it was a great social as well as artistic thing for all of us, working in different kinds of venues, different kinds of circumstances, doing different kinds of performance, everything from toprak to sandratari to contemporary work to a lot of wayang, of course. And I was playing with the group, playing music as well as being one of the dalang in residence, along with Mas Joko, of course, and writing plays, writing new wayang for the group. And it was a great few years in that way for all of us.